attend. So we'll have a private link that any congregants who are unable to attend can ask for that link. But please feel free to ask questions. It's congregants who, it's like they're here for the session too. So what I was starting to say is, as we're getting close to the election and knowing that there might be questions after the election and there might be uncertainty, that I know personally when I'm most afraid of anti-Semitism is when there's political uncertainty, when there are economic problems, when there are different conspiracy theories that are going around, whether it's left or right. Whenever there are extreme groups and whenever there are conspiracies, it often does not take long for it to come to the Jews. And I didn't want to be the one talking about it because I'm not an expert, but I wanted to bring in the expert. And I was very, very, very grateful that the ADL connected me to Eric Ross. I met Eric 13 years ago. My first wedding in Tampa was not Eric's, but Eric was the best man at the first wedding I did in Tampa. He was working for APAC at the time. And I'm thrilled that he ended up with the ADL. Eric joined the ADL in August of 2015 as the Associate Regional Director, and now he is the Senior Associate Regional Director. He heads the Glass Leadership Institute training courses. He's the lead staff for the Florida Region's Advocacy and Engagement Committee, and he coordinates the ADL's Florida Hate Crime Coalition, which we're also helping him, trying to get some more Tampa voices into that coalition. He responds to discrimination complaints that come through the ADL's Florida office and expands support for ADL's mission and initiatives through strategic community outreach efforts and working with volunteers. Eric received certification as an ADL Words to Action facilitator. We've done that program, it's great. And as an ADL No Place for Hate facilitator, and as an ADL Managing Implicit Bias for Law Enforcement facilitator. He is a local boy growing up in Orlando, went to the Hebrew Day School of Central Florida, and received his BA right here at USF in religious studies. Got his master's from Gratz College in Philadelphia, one in Jewish studies and another in Jewish communal service, and a specialization in Jewish nonprofit management. We saw his daughter earlier. And Eric, thank you for taking time away from your family to be with us tonight. And Eric is joined by Danny Simon, who is not a cousin as far as we know, but Danny is a partner with the Lalchin Danny. Simon
Very
Law
well
Firm.
done.
I was close. And he is a regional board member of the ADL, the co-chair of the Florida Region Civil Rights Committee, and a proud alumni of the ADL Florida's Glass Leadership Institute. So thank you to both of you for being here. I will mute myself for now and we'll chime in. And if anyone does have questions, you can put them into the chat box and I will try to moderate. But if at any point you guys want to open the floor to questions, you can do that as well. And we'll all do our best.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. I really appreciate it. Yes, Rabbi Simon, no relation that we know of, but perhaps we'll explore it down the road. So just so everybody knows, Eric and I have worked together on a bunch of things. I am not an employee of ADL, I'm a volunteer. As the rabbi said, I am one of the regional board members here for the Florida region in ADL. This is Eric and I first time giving this presentation together. So he'll be clicking the slides, I'll be speaking for a while, and then I'll turn it over to him. It's a great honor for us both to be here. So thank you so much to Rabbi Simon and to Temple Shaarei Zedek for inviting us to speak today. I hope that you're all holding up well during these crazy times and that you and your families are safe and happy. It's really wonderful to be able to see everybody here tonight, and we're thankful for you all coming. I do want to take a second at the beginning to acknowledge the significance of this time of year. It's 2 years since the Tree of Life Synagogue shooting, and it is just a couple of days ago. And so it's that much more poignant that we're here meeting on this topic today, and certainly a lot of the things that we're going to talk about tonight touch on that topic. Okay, so when you hear the words Anti Defamation League, I'm sure most of you immediately thought of one thing, which was anti-Semitism and fighting anti-Semitism. And yes, that is a large part of what the ADL does, but it's not the only thing that they're concerned with. For over 100 years, ADL's mission has been to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure the fair treatment of all individuals alike. And the ADL's founders in 1913 understood the same thing that the ADL does today. And that's that one part of the mission statement can't be accomplished without the other. The ADL was created to keep the Jewish community safe and secure in response to the lynching of a Jewish individual back in 1913. But the way we can do that most effectively is by ensuring that all minority communities, all at-risk communities, people of all religious faiths are also safe and secure as possible as well. And so our focus is broader than just one topic. So today, through our 25 regional offices and one in Israel, ADL is the world's leading organization fighting anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred through programs and services that counteract prejudice and bigotry. And one of the things that makes this organization so special is that we really do have a narrowly focused mission of fighting hate throughout the world. But that gives us a gigantic toolbox to address this mission. We have many ways that we do it. So very few people actually fully understand all the different ways that ADL works to create a world without hate. So I'm going to take a little time to explain ADL's work at the macro level before moving on to anti-Semitism today, and finally, what we can actually do to counter the rising tide of hatred and anti-Semitism that we're all experiencing. And then at the end, we should have time for a Q&A as well. Okay, so how does ADL do what ADL does? There is an acronym that ADL uses called the ADL PIE, P-I-E, and it stands for Protect, Investigate, and Educate. And these are the three categories of tools that ADL uses. So first I'll talk about how ADL works tirelessly to protect and safeguard civil rights in our country by advocating for church-state separation, fighting for social justice, protecting everyone's religious freedoms. And one of the activities that we're most proud of that was mentioned earlier is our pioneering of hate crime laws. It took ADL over 13 years of lobbying to finally bring about the 2009 Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Federal Hate Crimes Prevention Act. And there have been similar efforts throughout the country in all different states. ADL also monitors, researches, and responds to individual reports of anti-Semitism and all other forms of bigotry and discrimination. When someone's a victim of a bias-motivated, when someone is a victim of a bias-motivated assault, or their home is vandalized, ADL is there to assist the victims in any way that we can. We act as a liaison often between the victims and the police or the media as needed. We offer guidance on the most effective ways to respond. And in some cases, we even help to coordinate a reward for the information that could lead to an arrest of the perpetrator. The next piece of the ADL pie is investigation. And we investigate groups like no one you've ever known. Unlike law enforcement, ADL can collect and keep information on extremists and members of hate groups for as long as we like. You'd be shocked if you really got into the weeds and learned how law enforcement's hands are tied when collecting information on these hate groups. But we are not tied in the same way. And now, with online, the online world and the perpetuation of hate through online activities, we have an entire team of investigative researchers in our Center for Extremism who are responsible for collecting data on these people. They monitor the websites and chat rooms that they frequent, and whenever possible, they provide useful information and actionable intelligence to law enforcement. It's very often the case that when an extremist commits a crime in America today, ADL is usually already aware of that person in some way, or at a bare minimum, they already have information on the particular network of hate that the person belongs to. Just a quick example, in late 2008, 2 white supremacists were arrested for plotting to assassinate then presidential candidate Barack Obama. ADL already had huge files compiled on both men. When the ATF reached out for our assistance, we were able to immediately confirm their white supremacist ideologies and connect their online personas with their real life identities, which aided in the arrest and conviction of Paul Schlesselman, and Daniel Coward. And those investigations are going on. I see there's some questions, we'll address them at the end. The last piece of the ADL pie is education. ADL educates the Jewish community, educates other minority communities, educates law enforcement agencies, educates teachers and students, and we educate anyone who can help make a difference. And oftentimes people are shocked when they learn the full scope of ADL's educational initiatives, and the amount of people that they've been able to reach is really incredible. Through ADL's A World of Difference Institute, which includes the No Place for Hate anti-bullying campaign, the ADL has conducted anti-bias training for over 400,000 teachers and well over 1 million students spanning 16 countries and over 350 colleges. Through our Holocaust programs, we're teaching educators, both Jewish and non-Jewish alike, how to better teach about the Holocaust. Through our Words to Action initiative, we're doing highly successful work with students on high school and college campuses, training them how to recognize anti-Semitism and how to determine the most effective response to what they've witnessed when they do recognize it. I want to briefly tell you about another educational tool that ADL helped to create. And this is how ADL helps law enforcement tackle anti-Semitism and bigotry. And it's also something that you, the public, can benefit from as well. It's called our Hate on Display database, and it can be found on ADL's website or by downloading the app or in a pamphlet form. And without specialized training, you can't expect the average police officer, or certainly the average citizen, to know every single sticker on the back of a car or unusual tattoo and what they might signify. But if an officer pulls someone over and sees something that doesn't sit quite right with them, they can quickly open the app and find out the meaning behind tattoos like these. And one of the incredible parts about being involved with ADL is you start to learn all of the details of these things. And it really opens your eyes up when you're out in the world and you see these things on display. There are people walking around with these all around us, and they have their secret messages of hate, white supremacy, and Nazism that they're displaying to the world. In these photos, you see a lot of tattoos with the numbers 14 and 88. It doesn't represent the year 1488. H is the 8th letter of the alphabet. 88 symbolizes HH for Heil Hitler. The number 14 is a little more complicated. It represents the number of words in what's known as the white supremacist motto. The white supremacist motto is this phrase that they repeat as a mantra. It says, "We must secure the existence of our race and a future for white children." And that's the 14 words that's represented by the number 14 in those tattoos. Simply put, each and every year, over 15,000 law enforcement officials are trained in some capacity by the ADL, which makes ADL the single largest non-governmental trainer of law enforcement in the country. We train them on hate crimes, hate symbols. We train them on extremism, from the far right to the far left, and from political extremism to religious extremism. And all of this training is done for absolutely free. Just all they have to do is ask. Okay, so I've given you a little bit of background on ADL's various initiatives and what ADL is doing to try to make the world free of hate. Now I'm going to turn it over to Eric Ross to talk about anti-Semitism today and ADL's role. So without further ado, Eric, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Danny. You've laid a beautiful groundwork. I appreciate it. But as you said, let's move on to anti-Semitism today. I'd like to explain a little about the work that ADL does to compile, vet, and quantify the number of anti-Semitic incidents occurring in America each year. Every year since 1979, ADL releases an annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents. We use it as a barometer to help us determine if things are moving in the right direction or the wrong direction, and to help identify areas that we may need to shift our direction towards. Our focus towards. I'll be the first to admit it's an imperfect science. Much like other self-reported things like domestic violence, we know automatically we know that there are a lot more incidents taking place out there than what we know about. We rely on what people report to us directly, what law enforcement is willing to share with us, and what we gather from the media and then can independently verify. It's like I said, it's an imperfect science, but we do it year in and year out because it provides us with a good assessment of the trends taking place. So as you can see here, I'm backing up a few years to start. From our 2017 figures, the total number of incidents of anti-Semitic incidents, confirmed incidents, reported to us in 2017 raised nearly 60% from 2016, from 1,267 up to all the way to 1,986. In fact, at that time, 2017 was the second worst year on record since ADL began tallying those numbers 40 years earlier. Every part of the country was affected. For the first time in at least a decade, in 2017, we saw incidents reported in all 50 states. And unfortunately, things didn't get much better in 2018. There was a small 5% dip in total number of incidents from 1,986 down to 1,879, but that was still now the third highest total number of incidents on record for any single year since 1979. I pulled some interesting tidbits for you here from the 2018 audit. I'll give you a moment to digest them. But if you'd like to read the full report, you can find it at the link in the bottom right corner. You can jot that down or take a screenshot or a phone picture. Now, at home here in Florida, I actually have a little good news to share, which is not something I get to do very often, as you can imagine, working here at the Anti Defamation League. But in 2018, there were 76 verified incidents of anti-Semitism in Florida, representing a 22% decrease from 2017, when there were 98. And even better still, the numbers for 2017 were already a 28% decrease in total incidents compared to the 2016 previous year. Now, as appealing as it is to be optimistic about the Florida numbers, I can assure you that that trend did not hold true around the rest of the country. To illustrate that, that small snapshot in time from the latter half of 2017, I'd like to break down the information just a little bit further. We noticed that there was a distinct difference between the number of incidents before the Unite the Right rally took place in Charlottesville in August compared to afterwards, a 182% spike, to be precise, in just the last 4 months of the year. And it's not just our findings that show the increases like this. When the FBI released their annual hate crime statistics for 2018, they showed a national rise in hate crimes once again, just as it had in 2017, continuing the same trends as our audits. Now, a few months ago, maybe 4 months ago now, our 2019 audit numbers were released. And as you can imagine, these numbers included the horrific attacks at the Chabad of Poway, California on April 27th, the attack at a Jewish grocery store in Jersey City on December 10th, and the attack on a Hanukkah party at the home of a rabbi in Muncie, New York on December 28th. Now, sadly, 2019 showed us that we had increases across the board in every major category. Overall, we had a 12% increase in anti-Semitic incidents, up to 2,107, the new single highest total number we've ever recorded for a single year. We saw increases in harassment, in vandalism, and in physical assaults, with more than half of the assaults nationwide taking place in just the 5 boroughs of New York City. The only meaningful area that we saw a decrease in was in incidents that took place at Jewish communal institutions, whether that's synagogues, Jewish community centers, Jewish day schools or preschools, Jewish communal organizations. There we did see a 12% increase, following a 23% increase from the year before. I hope that trend continues, and for what it's worth, I believe that that trend in the correct direction when it comes to our Jewish communal institutions has a lot to do with the fact that many of us have spent a lot of time hardening the security of our Jewish institutions over the last 2 to 3 years. I'm sure yours is no different than ours. For those of you who are visual learners, I put in this chart, this graph, just to show you the breakdown of the last couple of years worth of increases, startling increases. So why is anti-Semitism on the rise? There's no one easy answer. If there was, I would have written a book long ago, but lots of people have lots of different theories, and I'm going to share with you 3 theories that I believe are 3 of the top reasons why anti-Semitism is so heavily on the rise. First, as sad as it is to say this far removed from the Holocaust, but anti-Semitism has been normalized. When elected officials claim that Jews use money to control Congress, or blame the country's problems on globalists, or publicly accuse Jews of invading their towns like vermin, this is the normalization of anti-Semitism. Collectively, we need a zero policy tolerance on intolerance. Second, I believe it's social media. Just look at Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, any of these services. We all use them. But with a click or a swipe, you can find horrifying anti-Semitism that would have made the Nazis proud. All because these companies' business models rely on these clicks and swipes for profits. But it needs to end. Silicon Valley needs to step up and expel the anti-Semites, and we need to disrupt the current clicks for profit model. A few months back, ADL started an effort called Stop Hate for Profit. We had thousands of businesses sign on around the country, hundreds of opinion makers and personalities and entertainers. And not only because of our efforts, I don't want to take sole credit, but because of our efforts and the efforts of some others. 2 weeks ago, Facebook announced that they were finally going to include the Holocaust denial as one of their breaches of service that can be grounds for removal. And shortly thereafter, Twitter followed suit as well. The third reason I believe that anti-Semitism is on the rise is all of us. It's a lack of honesty. Anti-Semitism comes from all sides, but for far too long, people have been unwilling to admit just that. We all must acknowledge anti-Semitism, even when it happens on our side. I would say especially when it happens on our side. Yes, we have a problem with anti-Semitism from some elements on the far left, and their casual demonization of the Jewish state definitely leads to the demonization of the Jewish people. And yes, we have a problem with anti-Semitism from some elements on the far right, with the wild conspiracy theories and the white supremacists and white nationalists who promote them. And yes, we have a problem with anti-Semitism coming from some minority communities. We can't ignore the evil of systemic racism or the social and economic challenges facing communities of color, but there's no excuse for the bigotry of low expectations. And there is no world in which it should be socially acceptable to attack someone simply because of how they dress or where they pray. We need a large number of people from all of these communities to stand up and collectively say enough. And just to be clear, for anyone who might be curious where ADL stands on the matter, whether intentional or not, those who deny the reality that anti-Zionism is based and rooted in anti-Semitism, yes, those folks are also contributing to the problem as well. So let's take a closer look at college campuses today, because in many ways, it's a microcosm. It's the easiest lens for us to view these things through, because they all focus so heavily on that one location. I'm guessing that many of you have children or possibly grandchildren on campuses today, or perhaps they plan to go off to college next fall. If you haven't already, you're probably starting to get nervous about the different forms of hatred they may experience on campus. So for the purposes of this campus-centric conversation, I'm going to focus on right-wing based extreme anti-Semitism and left-wing based anti-Semitism, the latter of which usually comes disguised as anti-Israel activism. Now, contrary to what some of you might think, it's actually a little easier to define what right-wing extremism on college campuses looks like, because more often than not, their efforts mostly focus around recruitment and flyering. A few years back, midway through 2017, ADL released a report about an unprecedented uptick we had seen that year in white supremacist recruitment on college campuses. During the 2016-17 school year, we found nearly 200 confirmed reports of flyers being distributed across roughly 100 college and university campuses around the country. From 2017 to 2018, we saw a whopping 182% increase in reported flyering incidents. And when you stretch across 2 years from 2017 to 2019, we saw white supremacy propaganda on campuses increase more than 6 times. But sometimes our information surprises even the people who should be least surprised by it. When we published that report in 2017, we were quickly contacted by the Manatee Sheriff's Department because they had no record of a flyer being put up at the Bradenton campus of State College of Florida. And the campus security officials they checked with, and they had no knowledge of it either. So they informed us that our information must be wrong. And furthermore, They don't believe that there's an active chapter of the Atomwaffen division anywhere in Southwest Florida, so we must be wrong twice. Well, as you can see from this email, we were able to confidently respond to them by sharing some photos. These were taken directly from the Twitter account of the Southwest Florida Atomwaffen division. That account doesn't exist anymore, but clearly the police were not aware that there was an active chapter right in their backyard. But most interestingly, the photo that you see on the left, that's how we knew about the flyer. That is a picture of the flyer posted to a college campus map on that campus. One of the big maps you see as you walk around campus showing you how to get to the science building or the math building. So with that kind of evidence, the police and campus officials conceded that perhaps somebody took it down without reporting it, or maybe whoever took the photo, took the photo and then took it down themselves and just put it on social media to get a rise out of folks. The second photo, I didn't put the skulls on their faces, they did. These were members of the Atomwaffen division from Southwest Florida celebrating somebody's birthday, their leader. And 3 out of the people in these photos are actually 3 of the 4 people who were murdered in Tampa. I'm sorry, was it 2 were murdered, 1 was a witness, 1 committed the murder, the young gentleman who had converted to Islam. These are the folks in the photo that you're seeing right here. This really is happening in our backyard. So sometimes anti-Semitism from the right does extend beyond flyering. So I'd like to talk briefly about Richard Spencer and his speech at the University of Florida on October 19th, 2017. For those who don't know, Richard Spencer is one of the leaders of the alt-right movement. In fact, he's the person who coined the term alt-right. One of the significant obstacles we're facing today is the realization by those on the far right and the far left that college campuses are fertile ground for recruitment and also offer an endless supply of media to document what goes on. Which is why people like Richard Spencer, you don't find him speaking at libraries or community centers, which he has every right to speak at. He goes to college campuses where the media is sure to follow, and he's going to get great exposure and the most bang for his buck. But his recent visit to UF is also a great example of how ADL operates in these types of situations. In advance of his speech at UF, ADL worked practically round the clock with the university administration, campus Jewish groups, minority institutions, the larger Jewish community, and law enforcement, focusing on taking proactive security measures. Along with ADL's Center on Extremism, we shared timely information with law enforcement regarding Richard Spencer and many of the white supremacists who were planning to be in attendance, and we even had staff on the ground to monitor the situation and be a liaison to the community. Unless you live in Gainesville, you probably didn't even hear it, but there was a shooting afterwards just off of campus. And later that night, when the police arrested the 3 individuals who had been there watching Spencer, as soon as those names were released, our Center on Extremism went into action. And by morning, by 9 a.m., our office was able to provide the sheriff's office, the Gainesville Police Department, and the campus police department with backgrounders on all 3 of those individuals, including what brands of hate they practice, what groups they've been a part of, what hate rallies they've attended over the past couple of years. Okay, so, what's wrong with my slides here? Here we go. Now, the flip side of all this is that anti-Semitism from the left has nearly cornered the market on the mainstreaming of the anti-Israel movement in America today. That's right, we're talking mostly about the boycott, divest, and sanction movement. That's the biggest tool of left-wing anti-Semites and extremists when it comes to Judaism and anti-Semitism on campus. So in 2016, we began a joint project with the Reut Institute, an Israeli think tank. The focus of the partnership is to create a comprehensive strategy for countering the BDS movement. The work is based on in-depth research and analysis of BDS efforts, both in the US and globally, so that we can identify all the many ways each year that they're being most effective, so that we can come up with ways to be most effective in how we counter or proactively head off at the pass. We hope that our findings will ultimately complement and reinforce the amazing undertakings being done by all of the Jewish organizations practically. So, Students for Justice in Palestine, or SJP, is the primary organizer of BDS and other anti-Israel events on college campuses today. The group was first formed at UC Berkeley in 2001, and it has grown to over 200 chapters now in existence around the country. Besides SJP, there's another group called Jewish Voice for Peace, which plays a large role in anti-Israel campus activity. It's considered the largest and most influential Jewish anti-Zionist group in the US. Despite the neutral tone of its name, JVP actively works to steer public support away from the world's only Jewish state. They've assumed a very visible role in the BDS movement and have worked to support divestment resolutions on college campuses and in mainline churches all around the country. One of the newer trends we're seeing, especially on college campuses, is anti-Israel groups co-opting other social justice causes through emerging alliances and unlikely partnerships. Here you can see how anti-Israel groups have been making a concerted effort to couch their hostility towards Israel in social justice terms, like by linking the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to the events in Ferguson in an attempt to appeal to their broader base of support, or by trying to compare Israel's security fence to US border issues or desires to build a wall in the US. So what does ADL do to help with responses like these, specifically in college campuses? And many of these responses apply to the broader ways we handle these issues. We train administrators, professors, and students about anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. We call for public condemnations of extreme activity. We advocate on the federal, state, and local levels to make a difference in ways that matter. We share information with Jewish student groups and Hillels across the country. We arm students with research and talking points to assist them. And most importantly, through our Words to Action program, we encourage students to counter bad speech with good speech. Now, there are two other new forms of hatred that we're dealing with today that I'd like to talk to you about, and they're both derived from the onset of the coronavirus. Here in Florida, we haven't seen any actual hate crimes committed related to the virus yet, but things had already gotten so bad when it comes to anti-Asian slurs and harassment that by March 13th, the University of Florida President Fuchs had to make this statement denouncing racist and bigoted comments already taking place on campus. And by March 25th, the Palm Beach Post reported about this young woman being publicly harassed and verbally assaulted in Palm Beach Gardens simply because of her Asian heritage, paying no attention to the fact that she was born and raised in the United States. Internationally, there have also been many attempts to link COVID-19 to Israel, to Zionists, and to Jews, with some people baselessly claiming that the virus is part of a conspiracy of profit and gain by Israel and the global Jewish community. For a while, this charge was actively being led by David Duke. Yes, that David Duke, the one you remember hearing about in the 80s and 90s, the neo-Nazi, the former KKK Grand Wizard, a former Louisiana state representative, a former candidate for governor of Louisiana, and even a former two-time presidential candidate, once as a Republican and once as a Democrat. I did not know that fact about him until I did a deep dive recently. The number of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that he tried to spin over just the first few months of the pandemic was fairly shocking. These are just some examples from his Twitter timeline. Thankfully, I can report that Dr. Duke was finally kicked off of Twitter for good a couple of months ago. I do find it amusing that for years and years and years, he was able to hide his hatred, his bigotry, his anti-Semitism so well in guarded terms and in veiled descriptions, and that ultimately it was the coronavirus pandemic that pushed him over an edge that he was just unable to keep it in, and that's what got him off of Twitter finally. So we've even seen credible reports of white supremacists planning to use the coronavirus as a bioweapon to infect Jewish and African-American communities. The second item related to the coronavirus is a brand new phenomenon known as Zoom bombing. I understand your synagogue is lucky enough to not have been harassed by that yet, but in the age of social distancing, we've all become very familiar with Zoom. We're using it right now. Zoom bombing is when somebody infiltrates a video conference and then interrupts it with hate speech, with threats, with graphic images of hatred or hate symbols, and sometimes even with nudity or flat out pornography. Nearly every day, we're still seeing these kinds of cyber attacks take place. While some of these can be attributed to just average garden variety internet troll without specific racist intentions, there has been a sizable trend in extremists using it to specifically target Jewish institutions and other Jewish public forums with their hate. Across the country, we have seen online learning sessions disrupted, synagogue prayers defiled, funerals desecrated, and educational briefings just like this one interrupted. In fact, the University of Florida's Student Senate meeting was Zoom-bombed with swastikas, genitalia, and sex acts last spring. And we've seen similar reports out of nearly every university in the state. At one point, we even saw a kindergarten class from a Jewish day school in South Florida disrupted by calls to gas the Jews. You heard that right, a kindergarten class. How do you explain what gas the Jews means to your 5-year-old grandson or granddaughter? So I was also asked to address some of the arguments taking place surrounding accusations of anti-Semitism within the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm sure that some of you want to hear me say that the entire movement is tinged with anti-Semitism, just as I'm sure that some of you want to hear me say that there is no basis whatsoever for any of the accusations at all. But the truth in life is never quite that simple, and the answers usually lie somewhere in between. So first and foremost, let me be very clear. Yes, we at ADL believe that Black lives matter. We support the Black community, we always have, including the Black Jewish community, and we recognize and understand the moral imperative to address systemic racism in this country, including the fight against police brutality. Black Jews, together with non-Jewish Black people, have been leading the fight against racism and police brutality for decades. We believe that it is an imperative for us to lift up these voices and follow their lead. We support the rights of protesters to engage in First Amendment protected peaceful protests, and we condemn the use of force by law enforcement against peaceful protesters. We also strongly condemn riots and looting, as this is no way to accomplish anything. But it's also important to note that BLM protests have largely been peaceful, and their leaders across the board, nearly across the board, have consistently been calling for peaceful protests and only for peaceful protests. Now, I'm sure many of you are asking yourselves, those of you who are a little bit more plugged into these things, what about the anti-Israel genocide accusations that were included in the platform for Black Lives? So please understand that there's a very real difference between the Black Lives Matter global network, an organic global network of groups working together for a common goal with no hierarchical overall body, and the Movement for Black Lives, which is the group that authored that platform. The entire platform has been removed from the Movement for Black Lives website, I was glad to see, and there has never been anything anti-Israel that appears on the much more broadly supported Black Lives Matter Global Network website. When that platform was written, it was also pretty telling that all of the major consensus building organizations had nothing to do with it. They knew it was going to devolve into some ugly things. NAACP stayed away, Urban League stayed away, all of the major organizations stayed away. And to this point, at this point, we know of no formal Black Lives Matter entity, either national networks or the more than 30 local chapters that have any anti-Israel manifesto or formal policy statement. It's also important to remember that today's Black Lives Matter movement is decentralized. It's a non-hierarchical grassroots movement. This is a foreign concept to those of us in the Jewish community. If you've ever been involved in your local federation, you understand the concept of how your JCRC is part of the JCPA. The JCPA belongs to the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations. Your federation staff ultimately wind up, down the line, it's an umbrella as part of UJA, which is now JFNA, Jewish Federations of North America, and they're also part of it. Everyone has somebody that they answer to. But in this kind of a movement, people act independently. There is no governing body. So because of that, we feel it's unfair to paint any community with one brush. And this situation is no different. Just because a small portion of the larger whole that created the platform, you can't ignore the fact that the overwhelming majority of those involved do not share those sentiments. To ignore that fact is no different than throwing the baby out with the bathwater, something many of you heard often growing up. For some, it's also very easy to confuse those marching for Black lives with those who call themselves Antifa. While most of the BLM protests, as I said, have been peaceful, when violence has broken out, it has typically been members of Antifa who were to blame. And if in a few cases, they've even found evidence that it was right-wing extremists coming in to cause havoc, to mix in with the crowd and to start violence. But generally speaking, if violence erupted at a BLM protest, it was Antifa to blame. For those unaware, Antifa stands for anti-fascist, which back when my grandfather fought in World War II, that was considered a good ideal to emulate and aspire to, being anti-fascist. But it has taken on a different mantle these days, a little more sinister. Antifa isn't a formal group, as many have said. It's an idea. It's a concept. It's not a unified group, much like BLM. It's a loose collection of local groups and individuals. And because of this, it's really impossible to know how many actual members there are. Their presence at protests is intended to intimidate and dissuade racists, but the use of violent measures by many in the Antifa movement, it can create a vicious, self-defeating cycle of violence, of counterattacks, and of blame. All forms of Antifa violence are problematic, but it also plays right into the hands of the victimhood narrative of many of the white supremacist groups and right-wing extremists that they're confronting. When images are seen online of quote-unquote free speech protesters being beaten by black-clad masked Antifa members, it provides extremists with a very, very powerful propaganda tool.
Eric, before just because we know that while there's no centralized Black Lives Matter group, we have seen violence at some protests. I saw something out of Philadelphia yesterday with two Orthodox men who were attacked at a Black Lives Matter protest. Has there been any instances of anti-Semitism or anti-Semitic attacks coming out of Antifa and Antifa gatherings?
That's a very difficult question to answer because all of these are so loosely organized. You can meet one person who is a Black Lives Matter supporter and also a member of Antifa and is also a member of Greenpeace, and because and also a member of Students for Justice in Palestine. So you put all of that together, and there's going to be overlapping ideologies, just like I described in right-wing circles. So there, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but
No.
The incident behind your question was about a month and a half ago. There was a rally that was highly publicized on Jewish media, and it was a very misleading headline that led the reader to believe it was a quote-unquote Black Lives Matter rally, and it was filled with all of these anti-Israel signs, and some of them went over the line into anti-Semitism. But again, in our world, we have to be very clear about context, and that wasn't a Black Lives Matter protest. That was a day of rage protest organized by Palestinians to quote-unquote rage against the Israeli machine. And yes, many of the supporters of that movement also happen to be Black Lives Matter supporters. There's overlap. So there were mixed message signs that did appear at that. But that concept, everyone got filled with fear that all BLM protests were filled with anti-Semitism because of a series of very misleading headlines about that one instance.
And then maybe before you go into Proud Boys, which I know we're all eager to hear about also, but hearing some of the questions and kind of, bringing them in, going back to where you were, there are a few questions about politicians. And, someone asked about Stephen Miller, and we know that there were emails linking him to Richard Spencer. I'd throw in Ilhan Omar and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and their links with BDS, and then questions about when Congress will or won't talk about anti-Semitism. So, what is the role of the ADL with politicians and political figures when they are either linked to or refuse to condemn these groups?
Gotcha. So it's a very good question, and one we get often. And the way we approach politicians is the same way we approach anyone who's in the public eye, whether it's media, entertainers, athletes. I know a lot of folks saw the Deshaun Jackson incident a couple of months ago, and we have an approach that I'm sure many of you were taught as kids, just like me. you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. And so our approach is not to stand up on the rooftop and at the slightest indiscretion to scream anti-Semite and paint somebody, tar and feather them as an anti-Semite, because they may not be. That leaves no room for nuance. That leaves no room for confusion or misunderstanding or people grow up in different areas. They have different sayings. They don't know what it necessarily means. But if you immediately call somebody a racist or an anti-Semite, it puts their back against the wall, and that person has no reason to ever let somebody educate them, to learn, to understand why what they said was problematic, why it was an issue, and then hopefully to use their own voice to apologize or retract or to explain. So we take that same approach with politicians. We always reach out behind closed doors first and foremost. Ideally, folks respond to us, we're able to educate them, and then we can make a difference in a lot of cases. That approach only holds water for so long. When somebody ignores us a few times, we have no choice but to go to the court of public opinion and use our bully pulpit. And when somebody flat out flaunts us or tries to pick a public fight with us, we're not going to shy away from that. But if it comes to a situation where ADL is publicly calling out somebody for their anti-Semitic behavior, know that every opportunity has been exhausted to make a difference behind closed doors. For example, when Congressman Matt Gaetz, to use a Florida example, a few years ago brought a Holocaust denier as his guest to the State of the Union address. We reached out privately with an email and a formal letter. We got no response. We reached out publicly with an op-ed. We got no response. The next time when that same Holocaust denier wound up on a private yacht for a fundraiser and by invitation only for the same congressman, that time we had to go straight to a press release to try and rattle the cage, and maybe we can make a difference. And my colleagues in offices dealing with problematic instances with Congresswoman Omar or Ocasio-Cortez or anyone else, Steve King on the other end of the spectrum. My colleagues in the other regional offices deal with those as they come up, and more often than we wish would happen. So if that...
We have a couple other questions, but why don't we go ahead and let you finish here.
Yeah, so now I'm going to switch to the other side of the coin, to the right-wing side of some of the things taking place today. And we're seeing a lot of alt-right groups, especially the Proud Boys, making headlines in the last few weeks. Back in April, the Proud Boys Vice City chapter down in South Florida was out in force in Miami demonstrating against mandatory mask orders. You can see a photo from that on the right. In late September, the group received a huge boost when President Trump mentioned them during the first presidential debate, spurring this lovely internet meme, which I've now seen reproduced onto t-shirts as well, circulating for a while. And just a week later, October 8th in Tampa, there was a rally with Donald Trump Jr., where the Proud Boys showed up in force as well. It's tough to know exactly their numbers also, because they're a group that's willing to travel, and not just within state. Sure, most of the guys who were there in Tampa were probably from here in South Florida, where they've got the biggest concentration in Florida. But people from Florida were recently at the rally in Portland, Oregon. People from Florida went to the rally in Kenosha. Proud Boys travel. And I would imagine that many of you have grandkids or friends who have kids or grandkids attending University of Florida, where just last week, many of them got this email purportedly, ostensibly coming from the Proud Boys, trying to threaten voters and intimidate them. We later found out that the emails emanated from abroad and were most likely done by a group trying to capitalize on two things: the reputation that Proud Boys have for not shying away from violence, and the fact that they had just been so in the news so heavily. So please allow me, for anyone who's confused, to clarify some misunderstandings about the Proud Boys. Although many in the media, and especially on social media, have been referring to them as white supremacist or a white supremacist group, that is not factually accurate. I know that people like to throw the terms hate group and white supremacist a group around sort of interchangeably, but there's very real and very varied differences between the different types of extremists out there. And nuance like this, I get it, it's not for everyone. I geek out on this type of stuff, but let me try to break it down and demystify it for you a little bit. Hate groups is a general term used to describe groups whose founding ideologies espouse hatred. You can use the term hate group to describe some groups on the far left just as easily as you can use it to describe groups on the far right. Now, a white supremacist group, in particular, that's a type of hate group whose founding ideologies espouse pro-white racism. This can morph into all sorts of different categories and beliefs among different white supremacist groups, but they all have that one key concept in common. If you check on ADL's website, you'll notice that our backgrounder on the Proud Boys, we specifically do not call them a white supremacist group, because that's not what their founding ideologies were about, and it's not what their overarching current ideologies focus on either. We specifically categorize them as a neo-fascist extremist group known for misogyny, Islamophobia, transphobia, and anti-immigration. Now, clearly, they have prominent leaders who are Black or Hispanic. Enrique Tarrio, who's on the far left there, in the left-hand picture, on the far left of the left picture, he's the national leader, and he's based here in South Florida. He claims to be of Afro-Caribbean Cuban descent. And finally, there have been a lot of photos circulating of Proud Boy members, including many I've seen recently of them with Roger Stone, making the OK hand gesture symbol. For that, I have 2 points to make. First, the OK hand gesture that we all grew up making, in and of itself, it's not automatically a white supremacist symbol as some people now fear. But depending on the context, it can be used as one. ADL's hate on display database that Danny mentioned earlier, it goes into a very big explanations on the context of when it is or isn't being used that way. Using that symbol in this way began as a joke among white supremacist groups to see if they could get the public to believe it truly was the white power symbol. But like much in that culture, what started as a joke quickly became very commonplace hand gesture used among themselves. So from there, it became a game to see how they could creatively get it into photographs, which eventually led to others starting to accuse famous people of using it in photographs of nefarious intentions when they were really just trying to make the old OK symbol. Now, what about the photos specifically of Proud Boys making the OK symbol? In this photo, my hunch is that they're doing this simply as a publicity stunt with Roger Stone. We know he's a supporter of the Proud Boys, but they're doing the OK hand symbol to get a rise out of people. The thing to keep in mind that's very true here is that although you can't, while there are certainly white supremacists among Proud Boys, you can't paint an entire group based on just a few of its members. White supremacy, as I said, is not the overall concept, the focal point of this organization. So while clearly there are some who believe that, and there are some who are going to use the symbol to provoke excitement out of others, that's just not what this group is. However, there have been very amply documented formal partnerships and overlapping between Proud Boys and actual white supremacist groups. The Proud Boys were there to provide security at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. And yes, you know, all right, so let me move on. For the past few weeks, ADL has been focusing a lot of our attention on the election disinformation being spread. And I'm not talking about voter intimidation. I mean massive efforts to discredit mail-in voting, for example, even in states that have been using mail-in voting exclusively for years. A lot of this began on places like QAnon and Parler, but it very quickly seeped out into the public through more mainstream forms of social media like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. There are groups out there like the Oath Keepers who are literally prepping for a civil war to be the fallout from this election. There are groups spreading conspiracy theories about planned coups ready to take over power regardless of the election outcome. You've got people spreading rumors of coups from the left or from the right. And we have groups that are threatening to encourage and engage in armed conflict if this election isn't clearly decided in a timely manner. So what we're looking for the future, Rabbi Simon mentioned earlier, you know, we have no magic crystal ball. What we can do is be prepared as best we possibly can. The Charlottesville rally was the best example. For 3 months prior to the Unite the Right rally, we were out there speaking to the media, to everyone who could possibly listen, about how we have seen everything it all tracks, it's all heading in this direction. That rally is lining up to be the biggest and most dangerous and possibly deadly white supremacist rally in 10 or more years in the US. And then afterwards, everyone screamed, ADL, why didn't you warn us? So this time around, the same thing's probably going to happen. Unfortunately, we've spent the last 2 months doing a lot of different election protection efforts, voting protection efforts. The last few weeks, our Center on Extremism has been doing special private briefings for governors, for state attorneys, for state secretaries of state, for mayors of major cities, police and law enforcement agencies all around the country, to warn them about the threats that we are already seeing chatter about possibly happening, so that they can start focusing more of their pre-investigative measures in other areas they may not be aware of to even be looking at right now. And when it comes to monitoring these groups, our Center on Extremism has started a big election focus where they've drafted lots of extra folks from the regional offices to come in and give extra support on monitoring for the 3 weeks leading up to, and as long as it takes afterwards. God willing, one way or the other, I don't care how you vote, I just care that you vote one way or another for the benefit of all of us. I hope it's a landslide win, and that way it limits the potential for violence, for unrest, for these armed conflicts or these coups that we're seeing the warnings of. And God willing, we won't have any major problems in the country this time next week. So now I'm going to hand the presentation back over to Danny to wrap things up with some things that each of you can do in your daily lives to make a difference. Danny?
Eric, thank you. Yes, thank you so much, Eric. I appreciate it. Just a lot of information. I know there's more questions, which we'll address at the end. Now to answer one of the questions on all your minds, what can you do to help push back against the rising tide of anti-Semitism? So I'll start with some easy ones just off the bat. First, you can monitor activity in your community that affects the rights and treatment of all people. Remember that an attack on any religious minority is an attack on every religious minority. Second, don't engage in rumor mills. Please confirm information before you pass it on as fact. This is extremely important. When you receive an email telling you to boycott a particular company because they're anti-Semitic or racist, don't just forward it on and assume that it's true. Two of our favorite websites for this are Snopes and trutherfiction.com. Please fact check before you spread information, because the spreading of false information and conspiracy theories is something that contributes to anti-Semitism, doesn't help. Third, report all incidents that you're aware of to the ADL. If a hate crime has been committed, call law enforcement first, of course, but also please visit adl.org/report-an-incident. So it's adl.org/report-an-incident to report the incident to the ADL. If you hear of a BDS event that's being scheduled near you, call our office and let us know so we can properly monitor the situation and respond if necessary. If someone's been harassed or discriminated against, urge them to reach out to the ADL. It only takes a few minutes, and you can report it at adl.org/report-incident. Okay. Fourth, report instances of bullying or religious harassment in schools to ADL. We have our lessons of No Place for Hate programming, and it's incredibly valuable. And we're willing to work with schools everywhere to counter bullying and cyberbullying, and we have a team of professionals ready to discreetly assist you when you find yourself in this situation. 5, visit adl.org and sign up for important news and action alerts so you can stay up to date on the issues. 6, get involved in our work. Become a part of the solution in whatever way makes the most sense for you. Okay. Now, many of you are looking for resources that you can use at home, at school, or at work, and we have so many items available. I mentioned Words to Action earlier. That requires an ADL facilitator to come to you. For those who this isn't an option for, we have a Think Plan Act, which is a ready-made booklet filled with activities, role-playing scenarios, practical lessons on how to counter anti-Semitism on campus. There's a ton of resources on adl.org. If you want to take a deep dive into the world of hate, there's the ADL Heat Map. It's a first of its kind, interactive, customizable map detailing extremist and anti-Semitic incidents around the nation. And we've backfilled it with data going all the way back to 2002. It can be filtered for any type of incident, type of ideology, or even state or zip code. And if you'd like to focus exclusively on anti-Semitic incidents, we have a tracker for that too, which can be filtered down to the state level. So there's so many resources available, again, at adl.org. Finally, you can also continue your education beyond today's presentation and sign up to participate in ADL's ongoing Fight Hate from Home webinars, which began back in March and have been hugely popular. Okay, so we are going to do a Q&A. First, I want to say another thank you so much to Rabbi Simon for hosting us and to the temple. We are honored to be here talking to you guys here tonight. And so we are now going to turn it back over to the rabbi and have him open it up for a Q&A in whichever format he thinks is best.
Before we do, only because it was in the description and it's something that I'm particularly afraid of. If you could say just a little more about conspiracy theories. And right now, the ones you mentioned, QAnon with with election questions, but anytime, what the historical anti-Semitic trope comes from the blood libel, and which was the accusations of Jews using the blood of Christian children in matzah. So anytime conspiracy theories revolving around kids comes up, I always worry about it going to Jews. And I think we have seen QAnon with anti-Semitism as a part of that conspiracy. And then also when you were talking about Black Lives Matter, while not specifically Black Lives Matter, Louis Farrakhan is another one who I'm really afraid of, who has a following and who uses that following with anti-Semitic conspiracies. So, where is the ADL there, and how afraid of these conspiracies growing and them turning specifically to Jews or growing in that aspect do we need to be?
Definitely.
I'll say a little something on this, and I'll turn it over to Eric, who really has much more expertise on this than I do. But, in my experience with ADL, what it becomes apparent very quickly is that in almost every conspiracy theory, when you dig down deep enough, has an anti-Semitic baseline to it. And the fact that we're Jewish, or many of the people on this Zoom, I'm assuming, are Jewish, if not all, doesn't mean that we're immune to spreading it, even if you don't realize it. And the proliferation of social media has allowed these memes and conspiracy theories to spread in a new way. It used to be there was a town crazy person and they had no one to share their craziness with. But now they get online and they've met a million other town crazy people. And once you hear the same thing over and over again, you start to think it's true. And just because you're Jewish doesn't mean you can't get sucked into a conspiracy theory. And that's why you need to check on these things. But please, you get an article, it's not from a place that you're used to reading or whatever, don't just repost it. Don't just send it to your friends. There's a very high percentage chance that if some outrageous thing is being said, it's probably fake, and may very well lead people into these conspiracy theory lifestyles that are really having a massive impact on our civic life. But specifically, ADL is always trying to fact check these things and put things out there and expose these conspiracy theorists. And you can be confident that when ADL comes out and expresses that something is false or a conspiracy theory, they've done their homework. ADL does not believe in being the first to comment on something because their credibility matters. And so when some of you, I've seen some people saying, well, how come we didn't respond immediately to this or immediately to that? We're not breaking news. We're here to get it right. And so ADL is not your first responder on something where we're going to comment before anyone else. But we will comment, and you can bet that by the time that comment comes out, it's going to be amply checked and supported. So I'll turn it over to Eric.
So it's a good segue to do a quick circle back around, because while I was talking, I couldn't actually see the chat. So I didn't see the question specifically from Sheldon Wolf. which spurred your question, Rabbi. There's a problem with the premise, Sheldon, because ADL did say something immediately when all of those statements were made. We made several public comments, and we worked behind closed doors with our friends in Congress and our friends in the House and the Senate. We were, involved in both the initial crafting of a response and then, the not quite as good response that ultimately wound up getting passed. But if you go to our website and you Google their names, you can go back and you can find the press releases with our statements. So to answer your newest question, Rabbi, yes, there is an extreme amount of anti-Semitism flowing through places like QAnon, through 4chan, through 8chan. The newest free speech site is called Parler, P-A-R-L-E-R. You'll notice it's very hard to find a Proud Boy anywhere on Facebook anymore because they've all moved over to Parler. And it's not just, I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but we use something here at ADL called a pyramid of hate. And the idea is that hatred starts on a foundation. It starts with ideas. It starts with thoughts. It starts with preconceived notions and prejudices, and then those turn into beliefs, and then those beliefs turn into words, and then those words turn into actions, and then those actions eventually can turn into criminal acts. Not everyone who starts at the bottom is going to move to the next level or any of the others, but anyone who makes it to that top level, to a T, you can bet they float up that pyramid. And that's what's happening through these websites. I actually have some notes here because I was hoping to get a little bit more into it. 4 major incidents that you all heard about, and they were all connected by just this. First, October 27th, 2018, almost 2 years to the date, the Tree of Life massacre by Robert Bauer. He was a member of the website Gab, and he posted his final post on Gab explaining the spree that he was about to commit. August 3rd, 2019, the Walmart in El Paso, Texas, Robert Crucius killed 22. Prior to that, he posted his manifesto to 8chan. Now, he was there because of his anti-immigrant views, and he drew his inspiration from from Robert Bauer. I apologize. My notes are a little, sorry. He drew his inspiration from a few months earlier when Barrington Tarrant on March 15th, 2019, shot up the Christchurch, now he was also a member of the website 8chan, and that's where he posted his manifesto. And then finally, April 27th, 2019, the Chabad of Poway, John Ernest, killed one and injured many others after posting his manifesto also on 8chan. And he explicitly cited Tarrant as his inspiration. So these are 4 white supremacists, 4 killing sprees. 1 targeted Muslims, 2 targeted Jews, 1 targeted the Latinx community. But all of them spread their hate online. All of them were adherents of the Great Replacement theory. And you all, whether you know it or not, you're familiar with this because you all saw those videos of the people marching at Charlottesville saying, "The Jews will not replace us." That's sort of the chant of the Great Replacement theory. And it's not a literal saying. They don't think that we're not having 20 babies apiece and we're going to overpopulate them out and replace them that way. The people who adhere to that philosophy believe that Jews are trying to import Black and brown people into the country, foreigners, to replace them that way. We're trying to take away their jobs. We're trying to replace them through immigration, which is what linked all 4 of these forms of hatred. So the next part about Louis Farrakhan, we have been monitoring and reporting on him for years and years and years, since before it was fashionable. I don't know why. I mean, I can't tell you specifically why there seem to be so many celebrities or athletes, famous athletes that like him. I can tell you the reasons I've been given, but reasons aren't always necessarily an explanation. But do you remember probably 10 years, no, maybe 15 years ago when Hamas took over the West Bank by democratic election? And none of us could understand why the people of Gaza, not the West Bank, why the people of Gaza would democratically elect Hamas. Well, because up to that point, Hamas had been providing the social services, the schooling, the medical needs, the financial support for grieving widows. They were providing all the care that the previous government had not been, which is why people willingly elected a government like that. I've heard the comparison likened to that because whether he, espouses hatred against Jews or the gay community or women in general, Farrakhan and his ministry provides social services for hundreds of thousands of people. And people who were raised on that concept that, well, I can overlook that, and that doesn't make me complicit with that just because he says that. But anyone who listens and doesn't say something in the face of hate, is complicit. So that's why we do reports after every single Founders Day briefing he does. We do reports every time they put out a new book or a new posting or a new, you name it. People, often accuse us of over focusing on him because they don't think of him as influential enough to warrant our time. But you only have to look as far as the celebrities and athletes that keep quoting him or using his teachings to know that it is still worth our time. So.
And then QAnon specifically?
QAnon is a major source of all of this. QAnon is the origination of a lot of the conspiracy theory issues that we've heard about. In my opinion, the most interesting one was the Comet Ping Pong and Pizza Parlor in DC. That one didn't specifically have to do with anti-Semitism, but the folks who were involved with it were all folks who are also involved in hardcore anti-Semitism. And they posited this conspiracy theory that the owners of this pizzeria and ping pong parlor in Washington, D.C. Were running a child sex ring in the basement, and that Hillary Clinton was involved in it, and other high-ranking Democratic Party officials were involved in it. And this conspiracy theory gained so much traction that it started being repeated on social media, regular forms of social media, and then people started even using it in public, on like television interviews and things like that. And it wound up with some Yahoo thinking it was so real that he grabbed his guns and he walked into the front door of Comet Ping Pong, and he threatened to shoot up the place if they didn't show him where the basement was. And he got more and more frustrated as they tried to explain to him that there was no basement in that building. The conspiracy theory, it was based in nothing. And the guy did wind up shooting up the place at the end. So these things, whether it's 8chan, 4chan, QAnon, they all are fomenting this hatred.
Right, but QAnon, the other ones you're mentioning are online platforms.
Yes.
QAnon is a group and a source of belief, and the where they're rallying people against pedophilia, but that has gone to accusations against Jews as a group also.
So QAnon was behind this conspiracy theory that I just described. Right. So yes, it's a scary world out there. I wish I had better news, but I do have one bit of good news in that area. 2 years ago, ADL created a brand new center on technology in Silicon Valley, and we've been working with the heads and the major social media and internet companies for years and years, but now we have an on-the-ground presence. Practically daily presence, it seems these days. And so we're making some big headway on getting less hate available on the internet. So.
Juliet's